everybody. So, this will be our first library podcast. I'm really excited. I want to be able to support our teachers in a way that I know you guys are completely overwhelmed and would love to learn new things, but it's really hard to do. So, I thought I would choose a book and go through it chapter by chapter and make our own little podcast where you can just listen to it and do the learning. So I'm going to start with this one. This is called Brick by Brick, and it is written by Hajel Ben, and it says, "The setting the foundation for a stable and joyful classroom." So at first I thought what I would do is read it, but then I thought that might cause issues for copyright. So instead, what I'm going to do is just do one chapter at a time, and we will just talk a little bit about what I learned in each of those chapters. And then if you're interested, you can then check the book out from the library. So hopefully this works and doesn't get too crazy. If I need help, Mr. Giancola, please help. Okay, so the first, well, there is an introduction, and in the introduction, he talks a little bit about what it was like being in the classroom and how he realized how important behavior was and understanding behavior. And he actually did some studies of just behavior to be able to become a better teacher. So, chapter one is about how behavior and motivation go together. And you can see here, I actually drew a picture of a house because he's talking about how it's the foundation or the footers is uh, the foundation of a dynamic and joyful classroom are behavior and motivation. So understanding that the student's behavior is also telling us what their motivation is. So this is what he says. If you can understand more about how students act and why they act that way, you can manage a class more effectively. So that is something that I truly believe. I was thinking back about when I had small children and I didn't know how to handle it and all their craziness that they did. You know what I did? I bought books and I read books to help me understand why they were acting the way they were acting and how I could better shape that behavior into the ways that were socially acceptable. So it kind of reminded me of that. And so he says, it is important to note that behavior and motivation work in tandem and affect each other directly. So first he talks about behavior, and he talks about this, to me, was the big aha moment. He said, behavior um, is basically the way we behave is a form of communication, that we are actually saying something with our behavior. And he says people communicate what they are thinking, feeling, or perceiving through their behaviors. And then he goes on to talk about how adults do the same thing, but we've just learned to do it in a more socially acceptable way. But students have not quite learned how to do that. And so their behaviors are more obvious, they're more on the surface. And so that's something to think about as we are thinking about what's happening in our classroom. And he says all behavior is purposeful. We're doing things for a reason. So that was pretty cool to think about. So then he talks about basically how a behavior happens. And he does have a nice little graphic that he walks through to tell us like what happens with behavior. So it says number one is an event. Something happens. And that something can be literally anything. You walk into the classroom. So an event happens. And then you have some thoughts that you don't realize you have. They're just like automatic things are just popping into your brain. And then you have feelings and thoughts that you are conscious of. It says once the automatic thought has occurred, it creates an emotional response and conscious thought. So the unconscious thing happens first, then it becomes conscious. And then the feelings and thoughts trigger the behavior, which could be subtle or expressive. So that's where we want to think about, okay, so something happened, something inside of us triggered, and then it became conscious, and then the behavior happens. So that's basically how all behavior occurs. So something that I thought was kind of interesting is that he did say automatic thoughts are shaped by perceptions, core values, and beliefs. So it made me think about how sometimes we might not understand what's going on with our students if they have different core values, beliefs, perceptions. And so, I mean, that happens all the time when we're having a conversation with someone or an interaction with someone, and their brain is somewhere else, and we're not understanding why they're acting the way they're acting or reacting the way they're acting because we don't understand their perceptions. They might be seeing things differently. And so this also made me think about reasons why we need to understand different types of cultures, different lifestyles, different home life, like that kind of thing, because that we can then understand a little bit more about why they're acting the way they're acting. So then he says, with an understanding of how behavior comes to be, we can shape it, modify it, or restructure it. And isn't that what we want? Right? We want to be able to take that behavior and shape it into a way that works for everyone. So I really like that. And then he says, if we think of behavior as another form of communication, then we can learn to understand what students are saying through their behavior so we can properly respond. And I just love the thought of, okay, this is another way they're talking to us. We have 30 kids in our classroom, and we can't have a conversation with each one of them. But yet their behavior is a way that they are talking to us. And so thinking about it that way and just paying more attention to what is happening with our students can help us to communicate better with them. So it says, our jobs of classroom teachers then is that of a sleuth, discovering the reason for the behavior and how we can modify it or restructure it. And that's something that I've been thinking about and talking about is how we are problem solvers. And when there's a problem, we have to figure out why it's happening and then we can solve it. And so he's saying the same thing. Our job is to discover the reason for that behavior so that we can help it. He first starts talking about how expectations are central in the classroom. And we have done some great work with that here at Southridge. And I know we really are starting to get some buy-in behind how important it is to have very clear expectations. And so he does talk about that. He also talked about how all of us, and students in particular, really do eventually live up to those expectations. So we want to make sure that we have expectations and tell them that this is what is expected. So he said the takeaway is that what you expect from your students, generally and over time, you will get. So he then goes on to talk about how important it is that our students learn how to behave in socially acceptable ways. And I actually wrote that this is a great way for us to help prepare them for the real world. As we all know, that's really what we want to do with our students. And one of the important things is to get them to understand how to behave, appropriately. So he says, clear guidelines and rules are simple to implement, cost nothing, and have a significant effect on student behavior. So once again, something we've really been working on, having those clear rules, clear expectations, and then what happens if those rules are broken. So he says, the way students behave in class is learned. Researcher Katerina Sever-Nendler states that students' behavior changes as a result of its consequences, and that classroom behavior is influenced by the classroom context, meaning the culture of the room. So yes, consequences matter, as we know, but also what matters is the culture in the classroom. What is happening in the classroom to help shape that behavior? So he then goes on, he literally says, this is truly exciting because it means that students' classroom behavior is malleable. And I know at times we feel like it's not because we get very overwhelmed. But remembering that, yes, we can change behavior really does help us. So then he says to remember that all behavior happens in a context. Like what's going on around us that causes this behavior. So to remember that. And then remembering that context gives us clues as to why that behavior happened. That is that communication. What is happening, which is then causing that behavior. I put a star next to this. It says, when seeing an off-task behavior, especially a pattern of first look at the context in which it happened or is happening, right? So especially when you see things happening a lot, what is that pattern? What is preceding that behavior that is causing this behavior to happen, right? And what can you do to change that preceding context? Okay, so he does say, and this is important that you understand, he says, note that the context of behavior does not excuse the behavior. It merely helps explain it. There will be consequences for the behavior. So we can understand it. We can say, okay, I see why you had your phone out. I understand that you were worried or that you were upset by something, but that doesn't mean you still have to put your phone in the basket because that's the consequence of having your phone out right now. And then we can talk later about a different way to handle it when that situation comes up. So I did like this. He said, well, I put right on here, good idea. So it says, oh, yeah, I like this one. He says, I suggest defining the model student's behavior, writing it as a paragraph, and explicitly teaching the student. So that's basically like how you're doing your expectations. But then I like this. To complement this, ask students what they expect of a good teacher. So that could be a good conversation to have with your students. What do they need from from a teacher so that you can know if you are helping your students in a way that they need? I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, and then he talks about, I know we've all heard of this, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. And so what causes the behavior? What did the student, or what happened, right? Then the behavior, what did the student do? And then the response. So what happens after the behavior? And that consequence can reinforce the behavior, right? So if they say something off color in class and the students laugh, that's a consequence. They just got to laugh. So there's a good chance they will repeat it, right? So it could also be if they are, maybe they're trying to prove that you don't care, that they don't have to listen to you. And then, they do something and you blow up and get angry about it. Well, then that might cause them to do it again because now they've proven the point that you don't care, right? So thinking about what's happening before, what did they do, and then what's the consequence afterwards. Okay, so let's see. He does say, and this is important, avoid presuming thoughts or feelings or motivations related to the behavior. So when you're looking at the behavior, don't think this is what they're trying to say. This is how they're feeling because we don't know. So we want to just look at just the behavior itself. Okay. Then after we look at that behavior, we want to start looking at the motivation. So this is a good example, like on Swiss, when we have to kind of fill out, like, why do we think they did it? And part of the reason that we want to know that is so that we know how to shape that behavior. So phones are a really good example of this. For a really long time, every time I filled out a referral for having my phone out, I would always put avoiding because I thought, well, they're avoiding doing their work because they're on their phone. But then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that actually some of these students, especially ones who you see are on their phone constantly, it might actually be that they're trying to get something, right? They're not avoiding the work, but they might be attached to their phone or attached to their friends, and so they're trying to get that thing. So thinking about that motivation, were they trying to avoid the work? Like what was happening right before? Was this a like, okay, now go ahead and get to work, and they pull their phone out? Or was this in the middle of writing, oh, now I'm checking my phone. So it might not have been avoiding, it might have been routine. So anyway, something to think about. So we have motivation. Motivation is simply why a person does something. And it says, understanding motivation is vital for a teacher's success and can unlock the key to student engagement and academic achievement. So why they're doing what they're doing is how we then support them to help to shape that behavior. Okay? I liked this one. I literally wrote yes next to it. It says, Motivated students are more likely to be active participants, which enhances overall academic achievement in the classroom and creates a more fulfilling teaching experience, right? We all want to be in the classroom to teach. That's why we're there. We want to help our kids, teach them. And wouldn't it be nice to have that classroom environment? So we need to think about what we can do to help shape the behavior in a way that helps even us have a better experience. I love that. So there are three human needs that drive people to do what they do. Okay? I love this. I did not know this. Competence refers to the need for individuals to feel effective and capable in their actions. So it makes me feel good when I can do something, when I'm capable about something. So competence. The next one is autonomy. And autonomy involves individuals making choices aligned with their values, which fosters a sense of control and fulfillment. So making me feel good, right? What values do I have? And what choices do I have in my life? And then the last one is relatedness, which is also called belonging. So that is the importance of social connection and meaningful relationships. So that's something to think about, especially with our teenagers and their phones, right? They get a lot of their social connection online with their friends through their phone. And so they might be choosing that belonging, that relatedness over the competence. So they might be choosing to feel connected to someone because it's harder to feel competent at their math work. So thinking about those three things: competence, autonomy, and relatedness or belonging. Okay? Now, I love this. I hadn't thought about it, and I mean, it's true. He says there's no such thing as an unmotivated student. If we believe a particular student is unmotivated, then we're likely to give up on that student and allow them to wallow in their apathetic state. But if we realize that all students are motivated, then we look for ways to move their motivation in the right direction toward learning. Knowing that all students have innate drives to be autonomous, to be competent, or to feel a sense of belonging, this offers us clues of how we can redirect misguided motivation, off-task behavior, and inappropriate behavior. And then he gives us some really good tips for what we can do to help our students with each of those things: competence, the autonomy, and the relatedness. And so a lot of these things we really already know. They're things that we've learned before, but it would be good to kind of revisit them. Giving lots of praise helps with confidence. Giving good feedback helps with confidence. Posting student work on the walls so they can be proud of themselves. Expressing high expectations, saying things like, this is really hard, but I know you guys can do it, and I can help you. We can get it done together. This actually says giving challenging tasks and don't grade them, right? So maybe give them some challenging things, have them work together and see what they can do. Autonomy is set class-wide and individual goals. Give choices. We should give choices whenever we can. Establish flexible deadlines, knowing that there are hard deadlines like the end of the quarter, but maybe some flexibility within that. Survey students to get their feedback on the class. Ask students what's working and what's not working. Use students' interests in lessons, doing things that they are already interested in. What could they research? And then we have relatedness, things like reading students when they enter the room, creating positive relationships, getting to know them, asking questions about them, decorate the walls with things that students care about, ask students to share how the class content relates to them, acknowledge and validate negative feelings. When students tell you they don't understand, then you can say, good, that's why you're here. If you already knew this stuff, you'd be in the next grade. So that's good too. So loving how we can kind of foster those things. And obviously those things are setting the footers, he called it, so that we can start looking at the behavior in a closer way. So he has a section called Final Thoughts. It says behavior is a communication tool. Learn to read behavior. Most classroom teaching is interacting with students. Students are kids, no matter if they're 18 or 5. They act like kids. The better you are at understanding how students communicate, the more effective you will be as a teacher. So he then gives some tips. Here's some tips. Number one, avoid immediate judgment. You don't know what's going on, right? So take a breath, try to talk to them calmly and figure out what's going on. Don't make a judgment. Number two, assume the best. I learned this one because I remember, you'd have some kids kind of chatting in the back while you were trying to teach. And I used to be like, hey, why are you guys talking back there? And then I realized, honestly, a lot of the time, they're helping each other. Maybe somebody missed something that you said, or they got off, or they were confused, and they're kind of helping each other. And so I started changing that when I'm teaching, and I hear some people talk, kind of chatting in the back. I will change it. I will say something like, are you guys good? Do you need any help? Were you confused? Something like that. And then that way, if they do need help, you can help them. And if they were just chatting, it gets them back on track without calling them out. So assuming the best. Then motivation is based on basic human need. So remember that they're doing things for a purpose. What is that purpose? So how can we help and support that? It is also vital for learning, which is based ultimately on relationships. Oh, behavior and motivation is vital for learning. Okay. And then the last piece says positive student behavior and motivation create a vibrant and stable learning environment. When students are motivated, they are more likely to actively participate, leading to a joyful school experience for both teacher and student. Planning becomes smoother as you build on this positive energy, establishing a joyful and stable classroom. All right, I know, pie in the sky, it would be awesome if it was all perfect. I get that. But also, one step at a time, right? Moving forward a little bit. Seeing what, pick one or two students that, you might be struggling with, or one or two students that are on the cusp, and maybe you want to build a relationship with them to help them start shaping their behavior in a positive way. So that has some reflection questions. There's 5 of them, but I don't want to read all of them. So I want you to think about, how does motivation impact your interactions with your students? So what is your motivation, and how is that impacting the way that you deal with your students? And thinking about their motivation, what are they trying to get out of it? And how does that impact you in the classroom? So that is the end of chapter 1. And once we finish this book, it will be available in the library. Please let me know how this went for you, and hopefully this is something that will support you in your teaching. Thanks, everybody. Bye.